Well, welcome to the third in our series of 4 podcasts. This is Stewart Galloway with Hubbard Feeds, and joined as we are on all of these is Andy Junkin. And today we're going to touch on the divisive and problematic topic of work-life balance in a family business situation. So, Andy, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can talk about how you address this with the farm families you work with.
I think a lot of farm families, this is a taboo topic that nobody discusses openly, but it affects a lot of farm families. The thing is that we don't openly talk about it, but it's an issue between parents and their kids as to what's the right balance between working too much and working too little on the family farm. And there was actually a survey done with large herd dairy operators in Minnesota, and the survey revealed that that was the number one issue. That was preventing a farm family doing succession planning was come down to the work-life balance. And as one son said in the survey, he says, look, if I work the same amount of hours as my dad did, if I work 15-hour days, 15 years from now I won't have a wife, right? What's the sense of me building up a successful business if I don't have a successful home life? And it causes a divorce and causes the implosion of the family farm. And that's a real issue in a lot of farms these days. And it's not just affecting the millennial generation. The truth is it's affecting a lot of the baby boomers as well. Yep. You know, there's a lot of spouses that 40 years ago would have remained in a marriage that was basically where the husband worked, or the wife worked long hours and didn't have much of a home life. But today, in this day and age, spouses are choosing to exit the marriage because why spend the next 15 years miserable? And so balancing work life is a huge issue. And I think that we think as farmers that we're the only ones that work long hours. And the truth is that there's a lot of other industries where hard work is the differentiating factor. I mean, you look at the software industry, there's talk about the 4-hour work week, but the truth is that the one common denominator in all the successful startups, like Jack Dorsey, he isn't working 4 hours. Jack Dorsey is working 16, 17 hours a day. You look at Elon Musk, look at the amount of hours that guy's putting in, right? But you go to a conference for software developers or software engineers, they have all gone through the phase. I mean, agriculture is about 10 years behind on divorce trends. And you go have a conversation with Jack Dorsey. He doesn't want to talk about software code, right? He doesn't want to talk about marketing strategies. He wants to figure out from you at a conference over coffee as to how you're figuring out work-life balance. And, you know, I think that we have a lot to learn from other industries, because when we go to an agriculture conference, we're wanting to talk about production and pretend we don't have a problem at home behind the barn. Yeah. But it is the number one issue that's affecting family farms. And I think that of all people that I've learned things from, the best word of advice I got was actually from Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean, this guy was an actor. He was a bodybuilder. Yep. He was a governor. And he was a businessman too. A very successful real estate businessman. And you know, he said one thing. He says, "Look, in order to be successful in life, you only have 24 hours in a day. You got to sleep 6." And he says, "If you got to sleep more than 6 hours, I suggest you learn how to sleep faster." And he says that leaves you 18 hours in the day. And you show me how you invest those 18 hours, and I'll show you where you're going to be in 18 years' time. And you show me how you invest those 18 hours, how you split that up between family and the business. I'll show you where your farm is going to be in 18 years. The one differentiating factor is figuring out that work-life balance.
Do you have an example of a successful farm that you've worked with that's worked with this work-life balance?
I get called, I'd say half the times when I get called. The last 15 years to turn around most dire situations, it's been this problem, actually. I got a call from a buddy of mine from college, and his wife, he called me just as his wife left him. She had been threatening to leave him all these years, and she had the kids packed in the van, and they were going. And he didn't know who to call, so he called me. And I called her, so I was equal friends with her. And I got her to sit in the Burger King parking lot in Woodstock, Ontario. And we were sitting there, and she was just crying. And she says, "I love my husband. I love my in-laws, but this is not a life. And basically what had happened was they went to build a barn. The contractors that were building the barn went bankrupt, took all their money. They had a huge amount of debt, so the father and son had to pull together, and they did finish off the barn themselves. And during that time, they had a hired man fall off the roof, and then another man quit, and they couldn't find somebody to replace him. And basically the father-in-law's solution was, well, money's so tight we can't afford people, so we just got to work harder. And she was on board with that. And she helped as much as she could. During that time, they had 2 kids during those struggles, right? And so she was trying to balance that. And she left the child in her husband's care. She was complaining, like, the only time he ever put his feet underneath the kitchen table and I didn't serve him a meal was in the parlor, was on Christmas Eve. And he couldn't even do that. He had to go calve a cow. He says, this is crazy. Like, what had happened was she did the books for the farm. She seen that they were back out of the red. They were making profit. And her father-in-law said no to them hiring she wanted to hire a high school kid to do milkings on Saturday nights so that her father-in-law could take off and go dancing. And on Sunday afternoons, her and her husband could go to the park or do something off the farm. And father-in-law said, no, this is the way farming is. And he went off and bought a farm next door, right? And she says, why did we just go back and do that, right? And what it came down to was, she says, I love my husband, but he doesn't have any time. We almost lost a kid today. And what they had was she had to drop off the kids to her husband's care. And he wasn't able to pay attention to things because he was running around because there was 2 men hired milking 400 cows. They had a girl to help them with the feeding the calves. But that was it. They were severely understaffed, and they had so many different problems because of that. And they almost lost a kid that day in a farm accident. Oh. And that kid was in the ball pit at the Burger King, and he had a bandage on his arm, but it could have been a lot worse. And she says, this is not a life. She says, I love my husband. I love the farm life, but this is crazy. He's working 18 hours a day. He's getting up at 4. He's not getting home till 10 o'clock at night. My in-laws refused to move off the farm. We'd agreed, like, when we got married that they were going to switch houses. That still hasn't happened. I live 14 miles away, and it's impossible for me to traipse the kids back and forth. This is just crazy. And so I said, well, I booked her a hotel room across the road, and I went out to see the in-laws, and the father-in-law said, nope, this is the way farming is. And his one finger was the size of 2 of mine. He had baseball gloves for hands, and he was drilling his fingers said, this is the way it is. I told her when she got married, that was a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job. She's from the city. She doesn't get it. And I turned to the son, who was a buddy of mine, but he was, all throughout this meeting, he was just looking at the table, and he was so sheepish. He didn't want to confront his father, but it was obviously he was conflicted between his wife and his father, the 2 people he loved the most, and he didn't know who to listen to, right? Because he didn't want to give up the farm. I said, well, how much, what are you guys? And he says, we're 50-50 partners. I said, did you have a prenup? And the son looked at me as if he had a deer in the headlights. And then you could see the father-in-law just look at me, and he suddenly realized that half the equity of the farm just went down the road. Mm-hmm. And then I said, it doesn't matter about the equity. I says, what's the sense in your grandson growing up in the city 5 hours away? What's the sense in doing all this? And he just broke down, and he started to try to explain to me about how he and the grandson would feed TMR rations in the morning and how much that little guy meant to him. And I remember him taking a shirt and just wiping his nose. I said, the only problem here is that we have a work-life balance issue. There's nothing wrong with you, Dad. There's nothing wrong with the husband. We just got to figure out how we're going to spend 18 hours a day and better invest it. And we had a conversation then, and suddenly it became not a big onus to hire a student on weekends to milk cows so the son could get away for an afternoon. When everything put into perspective, but up to that point, Dad was not willing to change his perspective, and as a result, what we did in that situation is when they actually switched houses, and so that the son could actually be on the farm. And so he'd be closer to the kids, so he wasn't having breakfast at his mom's and dinner at his mom's, right? And watching Wheel of Fortune in between, right? They didn't put a TV in the house. And when the son was in the house, he'd have lunch, and then he'd be on his knees playing with his kids for half an hour. And everybody knew between 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, do not call, do not bother me. And between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, same thing, before we start milking at night. Do not bother me. I'm going to play on the front yard with my kids. I'm going to play ball. And I'm going to work till 10 o'clock at night. I'm going to do night rounds, check on the barn, but I am going to be in the house between 8 and 9. I'm going to be between 3 and 4, and I'm going to come in and tuck the kids in between 7:30 to 8, 9 o'clock. Then I'm going to go out and check on the cows. And what we got him to do also is not spend more time better invested into his family. We also looked at how much time he was actually spending doing herd health. And he had been doing such a sloppy job because he was so rushed all over the place. I said, if you had an extra 10% of your time, what would you spend that time doing? He said, I'd look at the numbers. I'd look at the herd health. We have a terrible pregnancy rate. We have a terrible metritis issue. And what we got him to do was actually invest that time and be more conscious about how he spends his time. And that changed the profitability of that farm so they could actually afford that extra help. And more importantly, it changed the whole family dynamics, and they're happy today.
Were there other outcomes in that family then?
The one thing that I really liked was, like Dad, he was a big man, just a huge man. And he lived to work. Right, that he loved farming and he loved to work, right? And to actually get him to take Saturday afternoons off and to go do something other than farm, I actually literally almost had to drag him by the ear to get him on a motorcycle. And I actually had to drive out there one time and say, "You're not milking tonight. You're getting off the farm. I don't care where you go. Get on that motorcycle with your wife and go enjoy it." And he hadn't gone motorcycling for years. He still had the license. He had still on a motorcycle. Hadn't gone for years because he didn't have time for it. And to force him to go do that, I mean, he almost punched me for that. But at Christmas, he told me that he had cancer. And he actually died that February. And he said, you know what? You forcing me to do something other than farming, best year of our life. Wow. And I think that it really puts things in perspective. You show me what you invest your 18 hours in, I'll show you where you're going to be in 18 years.
Interesting. Andy, I'd like to relay a couple stories of my experience and get your feedback on those. As I said in one of the earlier podcasts, I went back to my family's farm, and was my grandfather growing up having hired men. As he became a farmer, he always had hired men, and so guess what I became when I came back from college with lots of ideas? I still was treated like a hired man. So I was just on a salary, no benefits. We had planned a family vacation, a weekend vacation for months with my wife's family. We did that. We came back. Monday morning, I'm back on the farm, and my grandfather is just angry. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And he said, well, Friday afternoon after you left, I decided that I was going to bring in the corn sheller the next day. We harvested all of our corn as ear corn, and what we didn't feed, we brought in the corn sheller. And he said, I had to hire somebody. I'm still paying you, and I had to pay someone else on Saturday to do your job. And he was just angry about it. That's one story. Another one is
let me address that, because I think the thing is that what you and your grandpa did wrong, and this happens on so many different farms, is that you guys failed to plan, and as a result, you planned to fail.
Oh yeah.
Right. The thing is, on Monday morning, you guys did not talk about what was going on that week. Right. You didn't have. I mean, your grandpa could have looked at the weather forecast and said it's going to be good weather on this weekend. I know that you had planned to get away, but things have changed. You got to change your plans. Can you change your plans, and can we make it up to you in 2 weeks' time? for you to, and I'll be willing to pay for, you know, an extra night for you to get away so you can make up to your wife, right? So you're not disappointing
Right.
her. And the other question's got to be is, you know, I think that what's really important for every family farm is that you have a Monday mornings or some point in the week, you plan what's going on for the next week. And with your operation, probably you showed up at the shop and then Grandpa told you what to do for the day.
Yep, every day.
And the problem you had there was that your grandpa owned your time, you didn't own your time.
Right.
And so you thought like a slave instead of an owner. And before you start talking about ownership in the farm, we got to start talking about your ownership of your time. You got to, when I have a farm family, like I had a shop where there's several brothers, and they had 3 nephews coming into the operation relatively within 2-year window. The first thing I have them do is the nephews put on the whiteboard what are the tasks to do the next week. And then they rank and prioritize those tasks. And then they kind of plan out who's going to be doing what. There's 4 siblings in a partnership, and then they have the nephews that make it 7. So the nephews come to the table, and they kind of plan out the week. And then the parents come to the meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they tweak that plan. So that the kids are kind of planning out what's going on. So they're thinking like owners instead of thinking like slaves. And I think that's absolutely, I mean, to learn how to organize your time is something that's it's undervalued. I think there's a lot of sons that, I mean, I remember one guy, he referred to his dad as a walking task list. And it's basically, if his dad didn't come to him with a list of tasks, then he went bicycling for the day. But the thing is, he never knew when he woke up in the morning what was going on. And I think for every family farm, you got to have a plan at the beginning of the week, and it's got to be both generations collaborating instead of one person being the dictator. The person that's got the most ownership in the farm should be the last to speak. And the reason why is that they should be tweaking everybody's plans and explaining why one task is more of a priority than another, so that you're teaching your kids how to think critically about the management of your time, because time is so important. And then more importantly, on nightly calls, you should have a daily huddle. I suggest around sunset, and have a simple phone call. If you got 3 or 4 partners, you call into a conference line. And if anybody's more than a minute late phoning into that conference line, you have to burn $10. That way everybody's going to set their alarm for 3 minutes before the phone call, and so we're not wasting everybody's time. So that when your son or daughter are getting out of bed in the morning, they know exactly what they're going to do for the day. And I think that they're owning their time, and instead of having time own them.
What experiences or stories do you have about hog operations?
I'll give you 2 guys that I had just this year. Started relatively same time. One had over 50 barns. I'm not going to say who it is, so that it's over 50 barns, right? Another guy thought he was a big player, and he had 3 barns, right? And the one guy that had 3 barns, he had his son was actually pulling stunts like threatening suicide at the age of 9. He was literally taking barbecue tongs to his throat, threatening his throat. And what it came down to was the son wasn't getting enough time with dad. And what was happening was dad was getting out of bed around 7:30, just as the kids were getting on the bus, kind of saying goodbye, and then kind of going to the barn and showing up around 8:30, and then not getting home till 9 o'clock at night after the kids were in sleep. And what the root issue when you drove down to it was, it was that the father was not being a father. And too often for successful family farms, I see a lot of farms where the kids are supposedly, we talk about it being a family farm, but family is a secondary priority. And the operation will have 50 farms. Same problem is that he had so many problems in the course of the day that often he wasn't getting home until 9-10 o'clock at night. All right, he had so many flames to put out. And for both those operations, it was a matter of getting them to plan their time. Okay, it started with them owning their time instead of the time owning them. And the one thing you have control of is what time you get your ass out of bed in the morning. And quite often, successors do hit the alarm clock because they don't feel that they're in control of their time, because grandpa's telling them to get out of bed. And you want a grandson to go from being a slave to an owner. You have him own his time by him knowing saying what he's going to do on the night before, and then go do it. Right? It becomes ownership, and no excuses for not getting results. And then what I do with both those operations was I had them plan out what are they going to, when they got up at, so they set the time for what they got. One guy got out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning. One guy got out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning. But both of them had to set the goal of trying to be home most days by 4 o'clock, just as the kids get off the school bus. And they took ownership of the responsibility to have a successful family as well as a successful farm. And instead of mixing it up with both and having both a failed family and both a failed farm, they took ownership of their time, and as a result, they got results. And the improved production out of the 3 hog barn, it was unbelievable. Once he took control of his time, what he was able to get done in the course of the day. For the 50 plus barn facility, he started setting a goal. Okay, before 10 o'clock, I want to be firefighting. I want to do things proactively, problem solve. And then after 10 o'clock, I'm going to spend the rest of the day fighting fires. And my goal is to set aside 3 hours extra in the afternoon, that I got extra time to work on projects if there's no fires to fight. But I'm saving that time so that I'm damn sure to be home just as my kids get off the school bus so we can go work on our 4-H calves. And both their lives have changed dramatically, both as far as profitability in the operations, because they're investing their time in every morning I have them spend 10 minutes writing out what they're doing for the day. And at the end of the day, I have them cross off a list. What did you get done? What problems did you encounter that prevented you from getting things done? How do you make sure it doesn't happen again tomorrow or in the future? How do you actually solve root problems that are holding back? And some things you can't change, but a lot of things you can. And that's by you starting to own your time and own results. And if you've got a checklist of things to cross off, when you go home, I mean, on a family farm, there's just so much to do. The problem is we don't prioritize. And when we get home, we're always thinking about the things that should be getting done. Well, the thing is, if you got a checklist you actually cross off, you feel you got something accomplished in the day. And sure, you might have a problem, but it's important to identify that problem, and you have a way to deal with that problem. Before you walk in the house, check that off. Write it down. What am I going to do tomorrow? Make sure that that problem doesn't happen again, and make sure it gets done in the next 2 weeks. So when you walk in the house, all the stress and worry of what you did on the farm is gone, and you can go home. You can be present with your wife and your kids. I have a buddy of mine I have on the wall that says, "Life is short, be present." And my buddy died of ALS this last year. And he was always present. And I think as farmers, we're not present because we're not good at managing and controlling our time. I just had a daughter, a farmer. Her mission statement is to take control of today's out of control. That's her mission statement. And that starts with her controlling her time and how she delegates that to her farm responsibilities as well as her off-farm responsibilities. And I think that's key for every family farm. If you control your time, time won't control you.
I agree. And one of the terms that I've thought about a lot through the years for myself is the tyranny of the urgent. And I know when we meet with our producers on a regular basis, we try to move toward or away from the tyranny of the urgent to things that are in the fire prevention area. And over time, yes, we can really control that time a lot better for them. So as we wrap up this podcast, time is the word that has come up so many times. Andy, if you'd like to just wrap us up.
I should make one comment before we wrap it up,
okay.
Though, is that your grandpa, as a result of his lack of planning, he probably was getting you throughout the week to drop whatever you were doing and come help him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
yes.
And I think that happens on a lot of farms because we don't communicate, we don't respect our partners' times. And if you can have a meeting once a week where you're planning out your time and you can coordinate, if you need somebody's help to do something, like hang a gate, it can be that simple. I need help hanging a gate. and it might be 15 minutes. You can coordinate that. You can eliminate half the phone calls you have between the partners, half the frustrations you have between the partners. You can get so much more done in the course of a week because, a lot of farms, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, you lose a lot of inefficiencies. And also you have a lot of frustrations because your grandpa didn't respect the value of your time.
Mm-hmm.
And that drove down to bigger issue respect between you and him. And if both of you guys respect each other's time, it's amazing how much that changes the family dynamics.
Sure would. Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm sorry to distract you from that, but the thing is, I think that the overall issue with farm families is that we treat time as if it's infinite. All right, and the thing is, if we have a problem, we just work longer hours, and we got to start investing time like it's money. Invest time like it's money, and if you can get a farm family to look at, okay, we have 3,000 hours in the course of a year, how are we going to invest it? I think that's critical. The rule of thumb I have with most farming families is, you got to work 3,000 hours. And the question is, how are you going to invest that time? So if you work more than 12, the rule of thumb I have with a lot of dairy farms, for instance, is we got to spend 12 hours in the barn, 12 hours at home. And the question is it quality time at home? When you're at home, are you watching television? And telling your kids, the only time you talk to your kids is telling them to get out of the way of the TV, or are you spending time on your knees with your family? The same thing with if you work more than 12 hours doing silage, for instance, or any type of field activities. How are you making up that lost time to your wife three weeks later? And having communication within the family about how you're doing that. And I think that should be part of the Monday morning meetings. As you say, hey, I was working 18 hours the 3 weeks of spring planting. Okay, I'm going to take 3 days off. I'm going to take an extra long weekend. We're going to have a 4-day vacation. Is everybody okay with that? And because you have that communication, you have that rule of thumb within the family: 12 hours at home, 12 hours at work, and you have that rule of thumb what's expected. You don't feel the guilt in taking time off, but as long as it's an appropriate time.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not appropriate because the forecast says we got to go on Saturday or Sunday, let's talk about that on Thursday afternoon. Not just be angry that you're not there on Saturday morning. And communication is absolutely critical. You got to invest time like it's money, and you got to get good at communicating about that and respect each other's time equally.
Yep. Well, folks, we've had another great session here talking about work-life balance. And as we said with the last podcast, if there's someone who may be interested in this particular topic, feel free to share that with them. And stay tuned for our final segment in a little while.